I'm on Wi-Fi. There we are. Hey everybody, it's a Wednesday. We're going to try to do this a couple of times a week at least. It is Burns and Holla. There you go, Jason. Now it won't bother you anymore.
It was annoying.
The title is now down. I'm Zach Burns, joined by Terry Holloman, as always, the Holla. Hey, Terry.
Hey.
So Terry and I actually, before we introduce the guests, we know who they are because their names are actually up on the screen, and they're a lot more notable than the two of us, Terry. We found out we had this weird commonality of being tremendously awful skateboarders in our teen years, which surprised me because you were in Edmonton at the time, pretty much at the same time that I was in Medford Lakes, New Jersey, skating in an empty pool and doing it poorly.
Terribly. It looked easy on TV when they did it all. You know, they roll around and doing all these tricks and jumping in the air.
Yeah.
It's not so easy.
I don't think I ever did one like curb ramp trick successfully, unfortunately. No, but It was fun, and it was something, you know, that we are learning about each other. But these other two people I'm quite familiar with, Jason Rantz. Hi, Jason. Sorry that you were nodding off there during our skateboarding moment.
Did you see that?
He gave us the full.
I saw. And from Q13, Brandi Kruse also joins us. Thanks so much, Brandi.
You're welcome. But 30 minutes before my bedtime, I put on a full face of makeup for you.
Jeez, I appreciate it. Wow, it's that early of a bedtime. I know morning news is punishing.
It is.
I just could never fall asleep when I did it. When there was still sunlight, there's just no way that I was going to be able to get tuckered out.
You get the blackout curtains.
So, Brandi, you asked me to send you a list of topics yesterday, but clearly a lot has changed. A lot of it happening in the last 45 minutes. The NBA has decided not to play at all today. Some people are calling it a boycott. It's more of a strike. And the Seattle Mariners now in Major League Baseball, they're not. Some teams are playing, but those games are already underway. The Mariners voted unanimously to not play tonight in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha. And Kenosha's in Wisconsin. If you don't know that, that's okay, because Hillary Clinton doesn't either. I wanted to go to you, Terry, first. What are your thoughts on the players deciding to not just take a knee tonight, but just take a seat and not play?
I mean, I support it. Their money where their mouth is. You know, they've been talking about taking a knee and making a symbolic stand for a long time, and finally they're saying, "Hey, we'll actually take this time and use our platform and say we're not going to put our bodies out there for the entertainment purposes right now while this is going on." You know, to make a statement, I suppose. You know, they always want you to shut up and dribble, so now they're just going to shut up and not dribble. In support of what's happening in Kenosha, and I'm all for it.
In theory, it seems good and righteous. But my eyes are always on November, and I always think about how could the Trump administration turn this into another talking point? Because he's already, he said, get those goddamn players off the field if they take a knee. And his base response to that, I'll throw this out to anyone. Are we, even in this moment of righteousness, just providing more B-roll for the Trump campaign? And during the week that they're having their convention. So I'm sure it's going to be mentioned tonight.
Well, I mean, maybe, but I don't think the players care about if there are more B-roll for the Trump campaign and for the RNC. I mean, my thought on these protests has always been, going back to taking a knee and Colin Kaepernick, it's their right to do that. And I know people tell them to shut up and dribble, but, freedom of speech has freedom of consequence, and they know that there's potentially a consequence for it, be it President Trump has something to say about it and uses it for fuel at the RNC, or that they get in trouble with their employer. And if they've decided that that's okay with them, then they've decided that that's okay with them. So to me, it's just such a non-controversial thing because it's the decision that adults are making for themselves. And so whether the president uses it or not, I don't see why they would care.
They won't care.
Controversial for a few reasons. I mean, number one, we don't actually know all of the details out of Wisconsin. I think that you can do two things at once. And we've had conversations about this all four of us separately. Like, you can take a position that we should be pushing for police reform of X, Y, and Z, whatever it happens to be. And you can look at individual instances and ask questions. In this case, the more information that has come out versus what originally was reported says there's more to this story that I think is worth at least waiting for. What was he doing going back into that car after they were trying to make an arrest?
But all that, to me, that's irrelevant.
It's not irrelevant if he was reaching for a knife, which one witness said the police were shouting, "Drop the knife." If he was going for that, that completely changes the story. You can still take a position of they could have handled it differently, and I think that that's fair. But it's certainly not the same as the first original report was. And the way that I first heard about this, before reading anything, the headline was, officer shoots a black man in the back 7 times. Now, anyone who hears just that headline is of course going to be disgusted, right? Anyone who just hears that. But then you see that they were clearly trying to arrest him. He was resisting. They used a taser again, according to a witness. We still don't have all the details. But more of that stuff comes out, I do think that the value in getting some of it, it's not as cut and dry as the George Floyd issue.
But non-compliance should not be a death sentence. I think that's kind of especially, last night we have someone shoot 2 people to death, and he's still alive. I mean, they somehow managed
to not be a death sentence, though. So when you pull a gun, for example, or a knife on a cop, there's going to be a reasonable expectation that they are going to use force. And I don't think that part's controversial.
I think it's controversial when that force is lethal.
Yeah. One of the issues that we have to acknowledge is the Kenosha Police Department has really failed in transparency on this one. And I've always said it, the more transparency, the quicker you can do it, the better, because people are going to demand it. And as the days or hours go by and you haven't released information, people make up narratives in their own mind. And in the absence of information, they create all sorts of scenarios. And so I agree with Jason. I always fall on the, more caution and trying to tiptoe until you really understand what happened and getting the full picture. But police departments have a responsibility in that too. It's something I think SPD has become very good at. They, as quickly as they can, release as much video as they're able to release. So the police department bears some responsibility for people not really knowing what happened. But just quickly on the athletes thing, people demand repeatedly, and I'm one of them, that people don't go out and loot and riot and burn things and hurt people. But that means we have to give people grace to peacefully protest. If you are one of those people who calls repeatedly for nonviolent protest, then you have to support peaceful protest. And that's what that is for those athletes. And so to me, it's just hypocritical when people scream from the top of their lungs about violent rioting and then don't allow people the grace to protest in a peaceful way.
I agree with you, Ray. And I'm in full support of the actual action, but reform will not happen if Donald Trump is reelected. And so I guess I'm looking everything through the lens of what's going to happen a couple of months from now. And I see people talking about it being an historic day, and it is in a lot of ways. But in the end, is the message that they're trying to deliver actually going to be the one that resonates with voters? A month ago, I was supremely confident about, Joe Biden. This is just such a flashback to 2016, Joe Biden's chances. And now I heard a horrendous crossover last night between Chris Cuomo and Don Lemon, but
so bad.
They have no chemistry whatsoever. I mean, that's so weird. Where Don Lemon is calling out like this, while it is exaggerated in other parts of the country, what's happening in Seattle or Kenosha or Portland, this could be something that makes the Trump base even more enthusiastic to vote, because now they have this fear. And fear is the greatest motivator, there is when it comes to emotions. So I guess in the end, that's my point. Because Brandi, you addressed the situation logically, like, yeah, you get mad at the rioting, but then these people are just not playing a game tonight, and you're also upset.
Well, you asked a political question, right? So here's the problem with any of these kinds of moves. the call from the right, and I think also from reasonable people, which is why, regardless of their political positions, which is why you're some concern now, which is something I said a couple months ago, which is people are paying attention to the unrest, and it's going to play a role in this. They're stepping aside and they're peacefully protesting without still any meaningful call against the rioting. And no matter what, when the rioting occurs, it 100% takes away all of the attention, because when you have two people getting shot in a riot that was 100% preventable, that's always going to take the attention away. And it doesn't matter if someone is peacefully protesting, because they say, cool, that's great, but we still have the unrest that you're not paying attention to. And now today, weirdly, after the more and more conversation about the polling starting to indicate that people are paying a lot of attention to this, all of a sudden Biden makes a comment today, and I expect we heard from the mayor of DC, I think yesterday, starting to talk. I mean, what threw me of that CNN piece yesterday was the way that they were talking about it is not to call out the rioting because it's immoral and dangerous and deadly, but because it's polling and you might lose. It just comes off.
Yeah.
Here's a question I got for you guys. You guys will know better than me because you're out there in the field on a regular basis, and I'm just like a regular consumer at home watching the news. Is there widespread rioting taking place across the United States, or are we looking at Portland and Seattle and now Kenosha and saying this is
Chicago,
basically representative of the United States right now? I mean,
you're looking at major cities that are big cities that every single day almost are having these kinds of actions. Say again?
They're rioting?
Yes, they are rioting every single night almost for the last 94 nights in Portland, for examend.
I know that. I know. I'm saying Portland.
That's not widespread.
Chicago. Yeah. I mean, look, when you say widespread, when we're talking about it in this way, we tend to pay attention to the 20, 30 biggest cities in the country, right? That's how we generally define widespread in this country. We're not talking about thousands and thousands of cities, and no one's making that case. But when you have this kind of action in major US cities and very little to no response from city leaders, that has to be seen as a significant issue. We had just on Monday locally, protesters turning into rioters try to murder police officers here.
Yes, and I think that Seattle is different than any other city because Mayor Wheeler, Ted Wheeler in Portland has condemned it. He has. He absolutely has. But here it's been tacitly condoned by the true power of Seattle city government, which is the city council. They have not said one word. They've actually been out there on evenings that turned into riots.
They don't create jobs.
And I would agree. Seattle has dealt with it poorly in terms of their response. But your description of it, Jason, is this widespread thing, like almost like that rioting is the same as COVID, seems a bit exaggerated as well.
Well, what we have, let's go West Coast to East Coast. You have Seattle, you have Portland. It happened in LA for a sustained period of time. You have Chicago, you have these tiny towns in the Midwest. I'm from Minnesota. To think, the sustained rioting that they had in Minneapolis and in Kenosha, in Atlanta, in Washington, D.C., in New York City, in Denver. So I think what Jason is saying is, it isn't confined to the cities where rioting and protesting has become a way of life, which I would argue is the case in Seattle and Portland, this protester pipeline that we have. But, I don't know. Widespread is a very relative and it's very subjective. But we have seen sustained protests, not only in big cities across the country, but also in not so big cities as well. So widespread to me is up to the eyes of the beholder. And
a protest is different than a riot.
It is. Yeah, 100%.
What Brandi was saying was not protest. We're not talking about protesting. I'm specifically talking about rioting and the stuff that turns to violence. I'm not talking about protesting. I don't really hear folks on the right complaining about peaceful protests. I mean, very clearly, and you've made the point that you believe that we're overstating the amount of violence. Okay, fine. But very clearly, even in that, we're talking about the violence. We're not talking about protests. I don't care about protests. If people want to protest, go. You have literally the right to protest, and I'm glad you have that right.
But you haven't heard the right talk about peaceful protests?
Complaining
and condemning protests? Then explain Colin Kaepernick. Like that was the most peaceful of
you're
protests.
looking at-
And all you did for 4 years
setting up-
since I've known you, again, is complain about it.
You're pretending that someone responding to the way someone protests is taking issue with a protest. There is a difference between saying that you have the right to protest versus saying, I disagree with the way that you are choosing to protest. So you have a right to protest. There is no doubt. I don't like it, for example, that someone burns the flag. You have the right to burn the flag. I will call you out for burning the flag. I find that to be a disgusting display that you have the right to do. That's the difference.
And I agree with Jason to that extent. And it comes, I have talked about this with cancel culture the other day. You know, just because you disagree with someone's take on something doesn't mean you're trying to cancel them. There is certainly room for disagreement. That's the First Amendment, the same amendment that gives people the right to protest. The difference is, are you actively condemning it? Are you saying it should be stopped or shut down? The rioting needs to be stopped and shut down. The protests, people get annoyed when protesters are blocking traffic in the street, you know, and you can make an argument about whether that's technically legal. But, you know, people taking issue and veterans taking issue, for instance, with Colin Kaepernick kneeling doesn't mean, and although I think there were probably some who wanted him fired, but there's a difference between disagreement and actively saying this cannot be allowed to happen.
But to quote the essence of what Donald Trump said, he said, like, get these sons of bitches off the field. That sounds like someone who's actively participating in a cancel culture.
Yeah, I think there are exceptions. But I don't like, you know me, I hate the everyone on the right or everyone on the left and the right's doing this and the left's doing that, you know.
Everyone in the middle makes comments like that. It's so disturbing.
The middle is the most annoying place to be. Let me tell you, because everyone hates you.
I feel like I'm to use somebody else's term, just tribeless, because I'm gonna, you know, I always argue with Jason, but then I defend Jason too because I hate the people that hate Jason. There's nobody left for me except for you, Terry.
Yeah, there's me, and I'm stuck in the middle right with you.
Yeah,
around, man. I don't know. I mean, it is difficult, and sometimes I wonder, Brandi. Like I watch Brandi, your interactions with people on social media, and I'm wondering what people see, because it's like you could say one thing, and somehow people on this side interpret it one way, and people on this side interpret it an entirely different way. I've always wondered how you keep your sanity going throughout the day.
Like, what substance are you abusing?
I don't keep my sanity. I think that, you know, today was a good example, for instance. There was, I would say, you know, if people asked how I approached reporting on police, I give police the benefit of the doubt until they prove that they don't deserve it. And I look at the actions of individual officers, or if you can see a bigger pattern in a police department, because they have a lot of power. But typically speaking, I think that the vast majority of people who serve in a uniform do so honorably and for the right reasons. And I would say that my coverage has been very fair of SPD. I did one story this morning on this SPD sergeant who was dumb enough to get caught on video calling protesters cockroaches and, you know, talking to a protester who was filming him. And I called him out for it. One, because I think it's stupid. And two, because at a time when officers are, you know, under more scrutiny than ever, it just makes it harder for his fellow officers. And so, you know, I do this report, and all of a sudden, all these people on social media who've been like, yes, thank you for being fair to police, we love you, are like, screw you, you know, like, this isn't even a story and all this stuff. And, you know, I get it and then I was, you know, being attacked by the left today. So I think you just have to realize, and what I've really come to realize, and I believe this is true, nobody wants unbiased news. It is just not something that people want anymore. They can say they want it, they do not want it.
No.
They really want you to regurgitate what they believe and to reaffirm it. And they don't like being challenged. And so that's why in the middle, when you're someone who's trying to be morally consistent, which is what I preach, you're going to anger the left and the right, because nobody likes to have their morality called into question.
And nobody wants to even produce unbiased news. You know, I understand Jason is sometimes referred to as a journalist, but you know, you're not. Like, you're someone who puts out opinions. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And by the way, because when people call me a journalist, I usually say, oh, I'm not. I appreciate, I do journalism sometimes. I'm not a journalist. I'm a talk show host.
But I've worked alongside so-called journalists, and they have no interest in producing unbiased news. So if they're not even interested in creating it, then how could they expect the public to even accept unbiased news? Because Brandi, I would say you are one of the few people who I would actually say is, as you put, in the middle, and in the middle usually means unbiased. But there's very, very, very few people like that left. Because let's be honest, it's not that successful of a business model, I guess. Because if nobody wants it, that means there's no revenue attached to it. So we're our own worst enemy when it comes to, MSNBC is so leftist, Fox News is so right leaning. Well, yeah, because the profits are attached to it.
Well, here's the challenge I want to know. I mean, and I've asked this question of so many people online that tell me, my perception is skewed because I'm getting it from the mainstream media or the lamestream media or fake news. Where do we, as American consumers, where should we get our news from? Where should we get our information from? Because everybody else is on, everybody that seems to be an expert on.
Everywhere. You should get it everywhere. I mean, so when I'm looking for news, because I like to try to come up with my own opinion, and obviously I come up with it through a conservative lens for the most part. But I go to the source material and I actually listen to clips rather than someone giving me like a 15-second cut. There's sources where I go. So I usually say that for everybody else, it's like go to original sources. And if it's a local story, for example, go to a couple. Go to, because usually every local station, for the most part, they're covering the same thing. They're covering the same 5 big stories of the day, and then they break it down into some of the other stuff. Just go to a few sources, and then you'll figure out which ones are being honest, which ones you can trust the most, and you'll find people like Brandi, and you'll like, hey, Brandi is someone who covers stories this way, or Simone Del Rosario, or whoever. And I've certainly found that. There's some local who I really like. There's some I really don't like, and I can see their bias, and it just drives me nuts, and I just avoid those.
It's weird. You should have said there's a few I like and most that I don't like. That seems to be more.
You know what the weird thing is? So I like almost everyone at Q13, Como, and Cairo. I hate almost everyone at King 5.
I apologize to the viewers. I had to plug my computer in. So unprofessional. Sure. And I left at the conversation I love the most. I just love talking about this. Did you ask Terry where people should go for news?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, it depends what kind of person they are, but if they're genuinely someone like you who actually wants news, which I, again, would argue is very rare, I agree with Jason. I think that you have to really try to get a selection of news. But generally speaking, I think that local media is the answer. I mean, I think that they have the best interests of the community at heart. Can TV be a little sensational? Absolutely. And, locally, I think you're going to get a much different story from Como, for instance, than you are from King on the same coverage. So I do think you have to kind of pick and choose and go around and read a couple different articles. Like, to me, that's kind of the only answer. I have different outlets I go to for different things, whether it's a political coverage or the economy or whatever it is. And so I tend to, depending on what kind of information I'm looking for, will choose my outlets that way. But it's tough. It's tough, and I'm not perfect at all. Very far from perfect with my, coverage. I've made mistakes.
I don't think local is all that, with the exception of King, which I find to be pretty biased, and I think they're kind of open at this point with it.
Are they? I don't know
bias.
Specifically.
Yeah, they very clearly have a left bias, and the funny thing is when any of the local activists who go to the protests that turn into riots and they say, stay away from Q13, Como, and Cairo, it's usually a little bit of a red flag of that bias. I mean, I stay away from Crosscut mostly because they don't really do hard news. They do analysis. That's leaning very far to the left. The Times.
Why would you stay away from that? Why wouldn't you read it and then?
Because I see I see what people think already on Twitter. Like, I follow a whole bunch of people who already are far to the left, and I have exposure to that. I don't need like a snootier version of what the idiots on Twitter say.
Snootier being like a code word for thoughtful or just elitist?
No, it's elitist. I don't think it's thoughtful. I think it's they intend to make it seem like they're more thoughtful.
But you understand people on Crosscut now are eviscerated by the left as well.
Are they? I mean,
they are.
Are they?
Constantly. Yes.
I'm not
name some of their columnists. I know there's David Croman.
William Fowler, who's the worst.
No, keep going. Another name.
Croman. I like Croman on Twitter, but I don't like his stuff.
But
David feel like I'm defending character here. Lily and David are very nice people.
Everybody's nice.
Lily implied that I'm an Islamophobe because I got mad that an Islamic person supported an anti-Semite.
And I called her out for it, and I said she should apologize.
Which she didn't.
She didn't. Good.
But I do think
that's the last thing you should ever do.
To me, like 90% of the media outlets in Seattle approach stories from a progressive worldview in a way that makes sense because that's the audience they're catering to.
But it's not really, though, is it? Like that's an interesting thing.
For Q13, it's not, and I think that's because we have the Fox moniker, and just naturally we appeal to people in the suburbs. But I think that's why I laugh when people get so triggered by someone like Jason because
me too.
The vast majority of the media options here lean left. And you're so triggered by like the 2% of outwardly conservative media outlets that it enrages you and you want them canceled and like, just don't listen. Just don't listen. That's just like, it just cracks me up.
If you're 24 years old and at the protests and hate Jason, just don't turn on AM radio. It's really easy to avoid.
It does show the power of my brand. But it also shows, and I will say this, like that they know who I am means they're secretly also interested in a way of either like the self-loathing, the sadomasochistic view of like reading stuff that they hate. We all do it. Like occasionally I'll look at like Twitter feeds of people who I just can't stand because I'm just kind of curious and I also hate myself. And I think a lot of people do that as well.
Well, they're kind of like you, Jason, and that's the weird thing is that you don't realize you're the Joker to their Batman, is that they only react to you. They have no opinions until you put one forth, and then they're the opposite of that opinion. Kind of like the way that you develop opinions.
No, I have actual opinions.
Based on being antagonistic.
You
confuse me with you. And or when we did a
Harry and I need to step away. Should we let you guys have this out?
I would have a position on something that he almost certainly shared, and then
like what?
When you've taken just the opposite opinion,
for entertainment's sake. I mean, because
you take a different position because.
Do you think I'm likely to Dunham? No, but it's a lot more fun to.
But that's my point is that people.
Right, but I did it.
Because I'm a
with a wing.
But my point is because people. I know that I'm a conservative, they will automatically say anything I say is 100% incorrect. And they will take the opposite point. And Brandi and I had a great sort of Twitter thing today with some idiot who we have someone, I have video of the person setting fire to the East Precinct, and we have photos and charges, or ATF is now involved, of someone cementing, sealed, closed a door. And so my story was the intent was to kill the people inside. How do you know that was the intent? Well, they sealed the doors closed with cement and tried to burn the building down. Well, how do you know that's what they wanted to do? There was another door, wasn't there? I'm like, okay, you're just taking this position because I'm the person who put it out there because you're an idiot.
No, it's because they don't want to admit wrongdoing. They want, and the responses to a lot of that story were, well, what about the killing of black men? What about police killing people? And it's like nobody's saying that that's not wrong. And that's sort of this annoyance that I see as well, which is like, and it goes for the Seattle City Council. If they're watching, you don't lose anything by being like, don't burn down this building. Don't lock officers inside and don't burn it down. That's not right. You don't lose anything. It doesn't take away from your advocacy for justice in this country for black and brown people. And so to me, they almost feel like it's bizarre. It's bizarre.
To me, that road goes both ways, and it shows the level of irrationality that we have right now in this country, that where we're so deeply ingrained in our own beliefs and ideologies and different wings that I have to go gung-ho with everything that happens over here on the left wing, or I'm not really truly in support of the movement. I'm not woke. Or I have to go all the way right wing or like to the extreme, or else I'm not a true conservative, or I'm not really supporting Trump like I need to. And I think that's the most idiotic thing in the world, where you have to be all in or all out when you're talking about these type of things. Now, there are some things I think you need to draw the line in the sand with, but I don't have to agree with everything Zach says and does when it comes to his political beliefs or his social beliefs or whatever, just because we both call ourselves liberal.
But I've worked in places where you did. And that's kind of the, not Cairo Radio, but certainly KUOW. Like there was only one way going forward. And even, some of the hosts there, some of the prominent hosts there have been called problematic. So they're not even liberal enough. Like, I wonder if anyone there has met anyone, farther to the right than Joe Biden.
They're funny over there. I go on Weekend Review sometimes, and they're always very, very nice. They're always very kind. But I think they book me as like the right wing guest.
Yes, you are, Brandi. I was actually the one that pitched you initially, and you are, so because they keep. What did you call them, Jason? Because I sent you all this information on the down low. I don't care anymore, obviously. If people know this, I'm not going back. So, they have they keep
an old binder of women.
They do. They keep track of how many
of like their guests. Where here's my black guest. Here's my gay. Here's my conservative.
No, they don't.
Yes, they do.
They have.
I'm on the right wing.
You're as Brandi. I don't think of you as a conservative. I know real conservatives. I lived in goddamn Utah. Like you are as conservative as it gets
for them.
For KO.
I knew that's how they pegged me to round out their panel, just by the questions and the way they were framed to me. And it's sort of like, what are we doing here? So that's fascinating, but not a surprise.
It was like, oh, we can't have her on and Brandi on at the same time. And we all know, I think, who we're talking about.
Yeah. I do know who you're talking about. That's probably the only person I wouldn't want to appear with.
But it was more. But there were more names than that. So it's
journalists. So that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't think that I will go on that show again with the binder of women in mind.
What is that?
You're not getting cash for it. I know we're not paying you here, but I have some Applebee's gift cards laying around. I'll send you one. But you don't get any money for it anyway. But it's not just binders of women. It's just that it's binders of all what they consider marginalized people. And there's part of me that isn't bothered by that, but then there's part of me that is incredibly bothered by that because.
It's literally the stuff that drives me nuts, and I'm usually the one who is given a hard time for calling this stuff out because of the culture wars and everything. But I hate this. I hate when folks done on the left, but not always. But it's usually done on the left where they're like, I don't care about you as a black person, but I want you to know that I really care.
Well, on the right, all you need is to get one person of color, and you've considered yourself a success.
You're a hero. Congratulations.
That's right. Yeah. But with the problem with it, I think that the intention of it was good, I guess, but the execution of it was just really disgusting. Like the intention of it was, well, let's try to find somebody with a different perspective. We always have these same people on, so let's reach into these communities. But then the fact that they would statistically break down, and then and you would get a printout of like, oh, so this week, this month, we had 22% black guests. We're trying to hit 28%. We had 24% trans guests. Like when you see it just put into an algorithm where people just become metrics, like there was something very dehumanizing about it.
Yeah, I get the intent because booking diversity is hard, and it's diversity of opinion and experience, and you need to have that in order to have a well-rounded conversation. But that's just
when that diversity just becomes a cold statistic. That is, that's
not diversity at that point, because I've made the argument many times that Look, I would argue diversity is diversity of opinion. If there is certainly a point to be made about the for lack of a better term, the superficial diversity, literally the stuff that you can see or the stuff that's easily identifiable. But if everyone looks different and they represent a whole bunch of different races and socioeconomic backgrounds and religion, all that stuff, and they all say exactly the same thing, okay, you've got diversity that's really boring.
Well,
but if you're saying different things, that's a little bit more interesting. But the problem is, so you say, okay, I'm going to get one black person, one transgender woman, one Jewish person, and one whatever.
Oh, sorry, Jason. Jewish people are not one of the categories.
Yeah, I know it. That's why I focus a little bit there. But so you get everyone there, and that's all you focus on. Well, you have no idea if they're going to take different positions. You make the assumption that they are, and then they show up and say exactly the same thing. I'm like, okay, well, that's not what we intended when we talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, Terry, how would you feel knowing that? Let's say you were invited on Week in Review, and now knowing what you know,
I'm a little upset. I'm a little upset because they haven't called me. I don't fit in any of their demographics, obviously.
Terry, I had you on because we were at 27% that month, and we just needed one more.
I was on there once when you were here, and I didn't call me back. So it must have been a poor performance. I must have given them what they wanted.
Well, you probably have been labeled right wing for being a moderate. You're probably in their right wing binder.
I'm like the new Michael Steele.
Yes.
Michael Steele, let me tell you, he's no longer considered right wing. So
no, not anymore. I mean,
he's a Lincoln Project liberal. So you
for the life of me, I don't understand the point of the Lincoln Project.
I'll tell you, these are, and you know what drives me nuts about them? Not the whole we're turning on the Republican Party. Okay, fine.
Well, if you're a Republican, you shouldn't have to go as far back as Lincoln to find like someone that you want to attach, the name of your project to.
They're all mostly middle-aged to older white dudes who act like they just discovered what memes are. And that's what really bothers me is their internet presence. They're just throwing out memes like they literally just discovered like their grandson just taught them what a meme is. It's like, oh, that's so cool. Okay, just stop. You're not.
The problem I have with them is they're 100% the throwaway guest on Bill Maher's panel. Like that's everybody. It's Steve Schmidt. It's Rick Wilson. It's now Michael Steele. They're always like the person who gets the least amount of applause during a Bill Maher show.
The Lincoln Project. I mean, from an outside viewer, it is what it is to me. But are they gaining traction? Are they making a dent in?
No, it's being pumped up by like MSNBC and CNN because they like the idea of it. Steve Schmidt is a failure of a consultant, and the same like the people who are there, they're there because they are the token conservative that is friendly to an MSNBC crowd because they like Republicans who will bash Republicans. It's like the Chris Vances of the national stage. Where
Chris Vance was the other conservative, Brandi.
Yeah, they're never, but they're beyond never Trumpers because they're not really even Republicans. Really, you can't tell me like a Republican. Tell me a conservative position, for example, that Steve Schmidt holds.
Tell me one that Trump holds.
Trump holds his position on
Israel. But he's lying on that. I mean, that's obviously.
You can say he's lying, but his actions have resulted in. But it doesn't matter. His actions have resulted in conservative policies.
Okay, name another one.
But that's why they have these people on MSNBC, and they like the idea of it. And so you've got this contrived sort of PR on their side that shows momentum where it doesn't. And there's like this smugness attached to it too that I just don't like.
Yeah, I don't like Steve Schmidt or Rick Wilson's smugness. Yeah, I think that's what bothers me.
I like Steele is like a likable, nice, smart guy. Schmidt just comes off as a jerk.
Yeah.
What about George Conway? And by the way, I think we should discuss that a little bit. What do you guys think about the whole Conway situation?
Prayers for the Conways.
Oh, Kellyanne Conway?
Kellyanne's daughter, George.
The worst. So they clearly are in the act together because they're doing it with each other and they're doing it publicly and trying to undercut each other. But then the kid gets involved, and then weirdly the New York Times like names the kid and links to the which is just so weird and goes so far to what's his name, Taylor Sopins or whatever his name is, the New York Times report, Lawrence, whatever his name is. So do you guys know the backstory with the kid?
Yeah, I know the backstory.
Claudia.
So I thought kids were supposed to not be reported on. You're not supposed to be highlighting like their, unless it's an actual news.
She kind of put herself out there.
Huh?
Yeah.
She really put herself out there.
Yeah, but you have an Instagram account, or you ignore it. It's not a news item. No one cares normally about the kid of an advisor to the president or the lawyer's kid. No one cares about that. And we generally
they're steeped in hating, seemingly not liking each other's professions.
Focus on that, and if
so
you
it's
didn't
gossip, but
kid,
you know.
But if you didn't focus on the kid, both of them would still be where they are. Like Kellyanne would have left, and Conway wouldn't be leaving the Lincoln Project or stepping down from Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me, these are things that when I was 13, 14, if I had TikTok, I'd be on there like, my mom this, my dad that, although she made some like kind of, that sounded alarming things that she said about her parents. But, to me, it's sort of, it's kind of the, ramblings of a teenager who's angry at her parents on social media. I agree with Jason. I don't think the press should be reporting or playing her videos or quoting her directly, but I think it's fine to acknowledge that, they step down because it's clear that they're having some issues with their kids and, with this kid in particular. And I don't know how much the situation between George and Kellyanne confuses me so much. I mean, to have George Conway dedicate his life to trying to get Trump out of office and to have Kellyanne Conway be his closest confidant and fiercest defender is really fascinating. But, none of us are privy to people's personal lives. So
I would agree, Jason. The two of them are scam artists.
What is that? He's a bad husband?
Bad husband. I mean,
why is he a bad husband? She's not a bad wife.
Because he's putting his wife in a horrible position. Would you ever go after your wife's boss, even if you just absolutely hated your wife's boss? Would you ever do that?
I guess it depends who my wife's boss was.
Really? Does it really?
Brandi, I have the same issue as you. Is my computer is dying. Give me a second. Jason, Phil.
Jason.
I don't know what to do. Okay, welcome to the Jason Rantz. Would you ever it doesn't matter. Would you ever do that, or would you keep that sort of stuff private? And you can have the conversation with your spouse and say, "Look, I feel really strongly about this. I'd like you to quit." Like, have some of those conversations and push them aside. You don't do that publicly. And the way he did it, especially, he didn't just go after him. He was trolling him. And that's just a bad spouse. Now, then maybe they're not close. That part I don't know. And maybe all of this is just literally, it's just because and that's how I kind of feel. This is just about the kid. But it's a bad spouse move. I would never do, not that anyone loves me, but I would never do that to a spouse's boss.
Well, maybe they'll write a book together.
Yeah, I get it. You might not want to do that to your spouse normally in a normal situation, but you have to agree that these are abnormal times. This is an abnormal situation.
They're not.
I don't know if would you do it if you felt that your spouse's boss was putting them in a morally compromising position or in a position that would affect their integrity moving forward for the rest of our lives. This was I'm not saying. I'm asking a hypothetical situation. Then
you're not calling out the boss. You're calling out your spouse. You're calling out your spouse. Then in that case, then you can have the conversation about whether or not you still want to be married to them.
Right, because who are you to decide whether they should be in a situation that might hurt their ethics down the road? I mean, I think if you love your spouse and you trust your spouse, you can relay that to them and trust them to make the right decision for themselves. And if you really think it hurts your whole family's reputation or something, then that's when you decide whether it's worth being in the relationship. But if my boyfriend came to me and said, I don't want you working for Fox News, I don't like Fox News, which he would never do. But if he did, I'd be like, well, we have a problem because that's my employer and I have no problem with it.
And then tagging Q13 and all of his tweets. Come on.
Oh my God, that's really what it would be like. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I get it, and I'm being devil's advocate here because I would never do it. I would never do it. You know what I'm saying? And
why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you do it? Because you're a good spouse, right?
Because I would be putting her in a compromising position
because you're a good husband.
I do it. I do it in a second.
Zach said I'd do it in a second.
Yeah. Just out of boredom. We need something to talk about. No, but I don't think he's a bad husband because I feel like this is all so very orchestrated. Like there's no way that Kellyanne didn't know that George was going to behave this way after she took this job. I refuse that. I refuse to believe.
Maybe there's just a bunch of people that are just staying married for the time being until this term is over, and then when it's over.
We'll know in a month.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're gonna wrap it up here.
Right after you fixed your microphone.
I didn't fix it. That's why we're wrapping it. I'm using my wife's goddamn Mac, and all the buttons are the opposite to what I'm used to.
We're at the mercy of Zach tonight.
I know. I mean, please continue on, but I have like 8% left, and there's just nothing clearly marked like battery cord. So I'm getting just really annoyed.
Wow.
I know. I probably should have worked this out before all this, but it's 6:45 anyway. I'm sure all of us are going to rush to watch the rest of the RNC anyhow. So good to talk to you all. Thank you so much for coming aboard.
It was
What's that?
It was.
Yeah,
it was.
First.
Terry and I will be back on Monday. At 6 p.m., facebook.com/Burns and Holla, youtube.com/Burns and Holla.
Jason.
What's that?
I'm looking at Jason do that boring, yawning shit.
So rude.
You got it. I know.
So rude.
It's just because the conversation wasn't about him. So, of course, he tunes out. You understand. All right. Thanks, everybody, again. Brandi, Jason, good to see you as always. And, yeah, we'll talk to you again on Monday.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.